My name is Potlingi Kvaran. I am an associate at PHB Development. This is a video tutorial on value proposition mapping. This is a four-part tutorial. The first video, this one, is an introduction. The second video is focused on how to set up the model. The third video is focused on how to conduct the interviews, how to enter the data into the model, and then how to consolidate data files into a single data file. The fourth and final video is focused on data analysis. Value proposition mapping is a methodology developed by CGAP and UNCDF Mobile Money for the Poor program, supported by PHB Development. This development is a part of a UNCDF coffee project focused on digitizing payments to farmers and traders in eastern Uganda. Value proposition mapping is, in very simple terms, a way to compare the cost of cash payments and the cost of digital payments. This is basically done using this model for every important transaction type that farmers or traders engage in, including coffee transactions, purchases of agricultural inputs, food, school fees, and so on. The variables that the model uses for cost of cash, there are three variables. There's the cost of risk, there's the cost of transportation, and there's the cost of time. And the model can use any combination of the variables, of these variables. For cost of digital payments, there are two variables. It's the cost of transferring from one digital currency account to another account, plus the cost of cashing out that money with a mobile money agent. The model can use any combination of these two variables, use one of them or use both of them. Value proposition mapping is a method that can be used in pretty much any agricultural value chain or value chain that is not related to agriculture to compare costs in an effort to estimate whether or not digitization makes sense for different stakeholders. So the model can basically group stakeholders that are engaged in relatively similar economic activities together, and you create value proposition maps for each of these groups. You can then compare and analyze these value propositions. For example, the coffee project, UNCDF was digitizing payments from Chakalani Coffee, which is one of the biggest coffee exporters in Uganda. So UNCDF and CGAP, they wanted us to answer this question. Do farmers and traders have a positive value proposition for accepting digital payments? And in order to answer this question, we first needed to know how much does it cost them to use cash and how much would it cost them to use digital payments instead. So in order to answer these two questions, we went into the field and interviewed stakeholders at various levels, mapping their economic activities over the course of a year on a month-to-month basis. Each interview took about between 2 or 3 hours. And if you want to use this model for some other value chain, the model allows for up to 100 interviews to be integrated into the model per stakeholder group, although that number can be increased quite easily. This is just the way that the model is set up currently. You'll find two different folders in the VPM package. There is a folder with the workbooks, and then there's a folder with these video tutorials. In the workbook folder, you'll find two different kinds of workbooks. You have a data collection workbook, which you use to input all the data that you collect in the field, and then you have a consolidation workbook, which you use to consolidate all the different data collection workbooks that you have used in the field. You consolidate them in this workbook and then use this workbook to analyze the data. Now onto the cover page. If we have already been through all of this background information, so we can start with the objectives. The objectives are basically to identify key economic activities performed by the target groups that you're looking at. In our case, we're looking at farmers and traders, but this all depends on what sort of research you're doing. Secondly, we map individual economic interactions and quantify receipts and expenses on a monthly basis. Number 3, we assess the cost of cash payments and compare them to DFS payments for the group's average receipts and expenses. Lastly, we identify activities with a positive DFS value proposition and define an integration strategy and a pricing strategy based on our data. Now on to how to use the model. First, it is best to start by usually performing a short survey in order to be able to identify key activities that the target group is engaged in order to be able to inform the model. We'll get into this a little bit more later when we get to the model setup in the second video. Secondly, provide one or more value proposition mapping data collection file per enumerator or survey staff and train them on data collection. Number 3, check on data integrity, coherence, and completeness as the files are returned from the enumerators before consolidating them. This is pretty important. We'll get to that a little bit later as well. It is important that data is not missing from important parts of the model, because if data is missing from important parts of the model, then the results will be skewed. Number 4, if you're using more than 10 interviews, you'll need to consolidate the VPM files by using the VPM consolidation file. We'll get into that in another video as well. Lastly, you can review the consolidated results, analyze the DFS value proposition for each receipt or expense, and conclude.